The last time I saw my husband, he was laughing. Not a kind laugh, but a hollow, satisfied sound that cracked through the silence of our 40 million penthouse like a gunshot. I was 8.5 months pregnant, standing in a hallway where the truth hit me harder than any contraction would. He wasn't discussing baby names. He was telling his mistress on speakerphone that he'd arranged the corporate sale of my life for 24 hours of peace, the time it would take him to vanish with his family's blessing. The betrayal wasn't just his infidelity, it was the sheer, calculated disposability of my worth. My name is Sarai Jones Sterling. I am an American woman whose brown skin holds the resilience of 100 generations. My husband was Julian Sterling, a white American billionaire who saw a woman's value only in the reflection of his own ego. That night, as I knelt on the marble floor, my water breaking hours after his final contemptuous exit, I didn't just vow revenge. I made a pact with the universe. I would build a life so untouchable, so powerful, that his regret would not be a mere feeling, but a quantifiable financial and existential disaster. Hello, my incredible family. Welcome back to Mr. James Family, your channel for stories of human courage and unbreakable bonds. May the Almighty recognize the struggle in every heart and bless every person fighting to do right. May He pour strength into the ones who uplift us, courage into the ones who protect us, and wisdom into the ones who guide us. We dedicate this space to the complex tapestry of human behavior, the effort, the failures, and the fierce, high-value content of a life genuinely lived. May every challenge you face become a testament to your spirit, and may you always remember the priceless, unwavering value you bring to the world. If you are here for authentic stories of resilience and redemption, like the video, if you believe in the power of overcoming betrayal, write, "I am with Mr. James" in the comments. Let's dive deep. Sarai didn't hear a door slam. She heard a click. It was small, polite, almost courteous, the kind of sound that didn't echo, didn't demand attention, didn't announce devastation the way a crash would. A sound that assumed you would understand its meaning without drama. The deadbolt slid into place. In that instant, something inside Sarai understood before her mind could catch up. This was not an argument, not a misunderstanding, not a phase that would pass once emotions cooled. This was final. Her hand tightened around the banister, the polished wood cool beneath her palm. The house was enormous, silent in the way expensive homes often were. Thick walls, muted footsteps, air-conditioned to a constant, lifeless temperature. A house designed to absorb noise, to swallow emotion. She was 8.5 months pregnant. Her lower back throbbed, a dull pressure that had been there since dawn, persistent but manageable. Until now, until the click. Julian Sterling didn't look back. Not once. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored coat as he walked past her, his stride measured, efficient, the stride of a man accustomed to boardrooms and decisive exits. His phone was already in his hand, thumb scrolling, eyes scanning something more important than the woman carrying his child. Beyond the glass doors, the engines of the private jet hummed softly, waiting, patient, loyal, unlike him. Sarai opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came out, because Eleanor Sterling stepped between them. Julian's mother moved with the quiet authority of someone who had never once been denied space. She wore cream, pearls resting neatly at her throat, her hair sculpted into perfection. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume and control. Eleanor smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It never was. "You've served your purpose, dear," Eleanor said, her voice smooth, practiced, sharpened by decades of social warfare. The word dear landed like a slap dressed as affection. The Sterling line is secure. Sarai felt her stomach tighten. Not the baby, not yet. Something deeper. Purpose. The word echoed. Julian is marrying Serafina, Eleanor continued calmly, as if discussing a change in dinner plans. A woman of our world, a woman who understands legacy. Her eyes flicked briefly to Sarai's brown skin, her swollen belly, her bare feet on imported marble. You were an exotic placeholder, Eleanor said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. The family jet is waiting. Our lawyers will handle the settlement. Settlement. Sarai stared at her, the room tilting slightly. The first true pain hit her then. Not a contraction. Something else. A rupture. A tearing away of illusion, of safety, of the version of her life she had believed in so fiercely she'd abandoned everything else for it. You are all leaving me, Sarai said slowly, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. Knowing I am due any day? For a plane ride and a fake wedding? Eleanor's smile thinned. Julian paused at the threshold. Just long enough to register her words, not long enough to feel them. It's simpler this way, Sarai, he said, not turning fully around. You'll be fine. My team is leaving funds for your maternity leave. Maternity leave, as if she were an employee being downsized, as if the life inside her were a temporary inconvenience with a budget attached. That was his goodbye. Not a touch, not an apology, not fear for her or the child, a transaction. The door closed. This time there was no click, just silence. Sarai stood there, the echo of his footsteps dissolving into the quiet, her chest tight, her lungs working harder than they should have been. She lowered herself onto the staircase step, one hand gripping her belly, the other pressed to her mouth. The pain surged again, stronger, real. Her breath hitched. No, she whispered. Not now. Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering softly onto the floor. She stared at it for a long moment before forcing herself to move, to breathe, to think. She called for help. The ambulance arrived as the sky began to pale, dawn bleeding into night like a reluctant apology. The sirens cut through the air, sharp and urgent, a sound that didn't belong in the Sterling neighborhood. Curtains twitched. Neighbors watched. Sarai was barely aware of them as she was lifted onto the stretcher, her body shaking now, pain rolling through her in undeniable waves. In the back of the ambulance, she gripped the hand of a young paramedic with kind eyes and a steady voice. "You're doing great," he said, grounding her. "Stay with me." She nodded, teeth clenched, sweat beading at her hairline. The house faded behind them. The jet lifted off. Sarai screamed as the world narrowed to pain and breath, and the fierce animal will to survive. Her son arrived early. Too early. The delivery room was bright, chaotic, voices overlapping, hands moving fast. Sarai focused on one thing, pushing, holding on, not breaking. When she finally heard the cry, thin but strong, something inside her shattered completely. Micah. She whispered the name through tears. Micah Sterling Jones. Her surname first. A decision made through exhaustion and clarity. She was alone. The recovery room was quiet. Too quiet. Micah slept against her chest. Impossibly small, warm, real. Sarai watched his tiny fingers curl and uncurl, marveling at how something so fragile had survived such violence. The door opened softly. A silver-haired woman in scrubs stepped inside. Sarai recognized her instantly. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Legendary. Brilliant. The woman whose hands had trained hers years ago, back when Sarai had been unstoppable. "Sarai," Dr. Reed said gently, surprise flickering across her face before concern settled in. "You disappeared." Sarai swallowed. "You were the most brilliant surgical fellow I ever trained," Dr. Reed continued, pulling up a chair. "Why are you here? Alone?" Sarai told her everything. Not dramatically, not tearfully. Just the facts, because facts were safer than feelings. When she finished, Dr. Reed sat back, her expression hardening. "You left a cardiac transplant position," she said quietly. "A vocation where your hands save 5 lives a month. Because a man wanted a wife who focused on the home?" Sarai's throat tightened. "I loved him," she whispered. Dr. Reed leaned forward. "Love is not diminishment," she said firmly. "It is elevation." Sarai stared at Micah. "Your life is not over," Dr. Reed continued. "It has been restarted, and the cardiac division needs you. We have a 40% higher mortality rate on complex, rare-type cases since you left." The number landed. Hard. A challenge. A calling. Sarai looked down at her son, his chest rising steadily against hers. She had allowed her life to be destroyed. Never again. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steadying. "But not for salary." Dr. Reed raised an eyebrow. "I want equity," Sarai continued. 5% in every medical patent pending in the next 3 years. A 5-year exclusive contract for the 10 most complex cases in the tri-state area. She met Dr. Reed's gaze. "I need to get back to my own kind of power." Dr. Reed smiled slowly. "Welcome back," she said. "Dr. Jones." Sarai exhaled. For the first time since the click, she felt something shift. Not healing, not forgiveness, but direction. She tightened her arms around Micah. Outside, the sun rose fully. Inside, something else was being born. Sarai didn't yet know that the deadbolt Julian had closed that night hadn't just locked her out of his future. It had sealed his fate into hers, and one day, very soon, the Sterling name would walk back into her life, not as her savior, but as her patient. Time moved differently for Sarai now. The hours of the day were stitched together by the rhythm of sutures, the steady pulse of monitors, and the tiny curious voice of her son calling her name from the playpen. 3 years had passed, yet each morning she awoke with the same sharp clarity she had felt the night her life had been fractured, the same awareness that nothing could break her unless she allowed it. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, skill by skill. Scrubs replaced silk dresses, surgical gloves replaced jewelry. Her mornings began in the sterile calm of the hospital, her hands steady, eyes precise, each incision a deliberate stroke of mastery. She did not merely operate, she sculpted life out of chaos. Cases that other surgeons deemed impossible, multivalvular reconstructions, rare congenital anomalies, were her canvas. Hospitals that once whispered her name in the context of marriage or scandal now shouted it in the hallways of medical excellence. Dr. Sarai Jones Sterling was legendary. Her personal wealth grew silently, invisibly, driven not by the Sterling name that had once defined her, but by her own intellect, her own unrelenting drive. Medical patents she'd invested in, technology she'd helped refine, and equity she demanded in recognition of her worth turned her into a silent, invisible force. She didn't need the world to know she was powerful. She simply was. She had made herself untouchable, and yet she remained human. Micah was her tether, her grounding point, the one thing that could pull her from the operating theater and remind her that life existed beyond monitors and surgical lights. He was clever beyond his age, inquisitive, a little bundle of curiosity who could make her laugh even on the nights she had been in the hospital for 12 straight hours. Watching him play with blocks in the sunlight streaming through the window of their apartment, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had created something pure, untainted by greed, ambition, or betrayal. But some threads of the past refused to be snipped. Julian Sterling's name, though absent from her daily thoughts, still resonated like an unresolved chord. The man whose arrogance had once been a storm in her life now existed somewhere far away, no longer omnipresent, yet still alive in memory. And as she had learned over the months, memory has a persistence that no wealth or skill could erase. The unique twist of fate, she realized, was that the one thing Julian had always truly valued, sterling global tech, remained a beacon calling him back to relevance. A business, a legacy, an identity, something tangible he could cling to when his personal world collapsed. And as the years had proven, identity rooted in arrogance and entitlement has a fragile shelf life. One quiet evening, as the city below hummed in muted lights and the hospital corridors were cloaked in a soft nocturnal glow, Dr. Evelyn Reed's call came. Its gravity was instant. Her voice, calm but firm, conveyed urgency and unspoken danger. "Sarai," she said, "you need to see this file. The patient is Mr. Elias Sterling, Julian's father. Massive cardiac failure. Only one person on the planet has the technical skill to correct this rare, multivalvular issue. You." Sarai felt the familiar hum of her pulse change. Not anger, not fear, but a cold exhilaration that settled in her chest and spread outward. This was no ordinary case. This was high-stakes life-and-death surgery with the added weight of history and personal consequence. Her eyes scanned the digital file, numbers and images of failing heart valves, arteries constricted beyond normal tolerance, rhythms irregular and deadly. The man who had once dismissed her, whose scorn had been sharpened by familial pride and entitlement, now relied on her life-giving skill. She studied his chart with meticulous focus. The faint scars from prior interventions, the subtle signs of heart muscle fatigue, the delicate balance required to stabilize him before surgery, all screamed a challenge she would not allow to fail. She inhaled deeply, letting the cold, analytical mind she had trained over a decade take control. And yet, beneath the technical assessment, there was a simmering ember of irony. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. The man who had abandoned her, whose arrogance had deemed her worth disposable, was now literally in her hands. "I'll review the case," Sarai said quietly, voice steady, deliberate. Her eyes met Dr. Reed's, who nodded in silent understanding. "But they come to me. They wait. And they will not interact with me outside of a strictly professional setting. They will pay my fee, $1 million up front, to my personal foundation." Dr. Reed's eyes widened slightly, just enough to reveal surprise before settling into respect. She understood. This wasn't greed. This was control. A measure of authority reclaimed, a boundary drawn around her power that no one, no matter their wealth, would cross lightly. Within the hour, the Sterlings accepted. They did not fully understand whom they were begging. They were accustomed to power. To them, requests were commands, offers were debts to be paid. But Sarai had rewritten the rules. The game had changed. The consultation was set. Sarai walked into the conference room like a general entering her command center. Custom-tailored suit, heels clicking softly against the polished floor, her hair pulled back to reveal sharp eyes that took in every detail. 3 minutes late, deliberately. A measure of control, a reminder that she answered to no one. Not Julian, not his mother, not anyone who had once dismissed her worth. Inside, the air was thick with a mixture of anticipation and unacknowledged guilt. Julian, Eleanor, and the frail, silent figure of Elias Sterling occupied the room. Sarai paused, letting the silence stretch, observing them as she would a complex patient. Julian's posture was stiff, his arrogance replaced by something else: uncertainty, unease, maybe even fear. Eleanor's carefully maintained poise trembled just slightly, the kind of imperfection a predator notices in its prey. Elias Sterling's eyes, weak yet alive, settled on her. The room shifted without words. History, consequence, and irony merged in the stillness. Sarai's voice broke it, calm, precise, sharp as scalpel steel. "Dr. Con Sterling," she said, acknowledging the man's formal title. Then, softer, cutting, "Dr. Jones, Sterling is correct. I am here regarding Mr. Sterling's critical cardiac condition. I believe you knew me once as Sarai Sterling. I am the surgeon who will be performing your procedure, should I choose to accept the case." Eleanor gasped, hand flying to her mouth in a rare human gesture. Julian's blue eyes widened, the arrogance and self-assured dominance he carried like armor now dissipating, leaving only shock and fear. He had believed he could predict, control, and manipulate every aspect of her life. He had miscalculated. He had underestimated the force of a woman wronged, tempered, and rebuilt. You're the surgeon," Julian stammered, voice low, faltering, unfamiliar even to him. Sarai leaned forward slightly, letting her gaze lock with his. "I am the surgeon who left a prestigious career because your family felt it was too ambitious for a wife," she said, voice cold and unyielding. "I am the surgeon whose water broke on your marble floor, abandoned while you and your mother boarded a private jet to marry your mistress. And now, I am the only person in the world who can save the life of the man who facilitated that betrayal." She paused, letting the weight of each word sink into the sterile air. "And I will save him," she continued, voice calm, deliberate. "But not for you, Julian. Not for Serafina. Not for your legacy. I will save him for the oath I took, for the knowledge that skill and duty are not subject to ego, and for the universe's exquisite sense of irony." The room remained still. Julian's lips parted and closed, but no sound emerged. Eleanor's face was a mask, fragile and cracking at the edges. Elias Sterling, frail but alert, regarded her with a mix of gratitude and awe, unaware of the full weight of history being navigated in this very moment. Sarai straightened, adjusted her suit, and regarded them all with a subtle, unspoken dominance. The patient's life was in her hands. The past, for now, was contained in this room, and for the first time in years, Sarai felt the intoxicating, chilling clarity of being utterly indispensable. This was her domain. She had returned. She would define the terms, and she would not be trifled with. Sarai had not yet made a single incision, nor uttered a single compromise. And yet, in the silence, she felt the stirrings of a revelation waiting to break. The very man she had once loved, Julian, was about to witness the full scope of her power, and he would have no choice but to understand what it truly meant to lose her. The operating room was silent except for the soft, precise rhythm of monitors and the faint hiss of the ventilator. Sarai moved with the discipline that had become second nature. Every incision, every suture, every careful pause was deliberate, intentional, a choreography perfected over years of precision, pain, and relentless practice. She worked with the kind of calm focus that made her colleagues pause mid-sentence in awe, yet no one had dared question the cold efficiency she wielded like a scalpel. This wasn't just surgery, it was her reclamation. 12 hours stretched into a timeless space where only skill, knowledge, and determination existed. She performed a full multivalvular reconstruction with the ease of someone born to the operating table and hardened by betrayal. By the time she stepped out, her face framed by the soft glow of the surgical lights, Elias Sterling had survived. His heartbeat steadied, his vitals were returning to normal, and Sarai allowed herself a single, fleeting sense of triumph. It wasn't for Julian, nor for his mother, nor even for the man in the wheelchair. It was for herself, proof that she could hold life in her hands, reshape destiny, and remain unbroken. The surgical team whispered her name, but she hardly registered it. Her mind had already moved forward as it always did. The real world, beyond the operating theater, waited, and the world had indeed shifted. Within hours of Elias's stabilization, a formal summons arrived, not from a hospital, not from any medical board, but from the SEC. It was the first tangible ripple of the second storm she had long suspected would follow Julian's reckless choices. He had been a man who thrived on speed, power, and unchecked hubris, and now those very traits were undoing him. In the process of hasty marriages and ill-conceived deals, Julian Sterling had overlooked a crucial acquisition. That oversight had been noticed, exploited, and weaponized by a rival he had once scorned, a mentor turned nemesis. The empire he had taken for granted was now unraveling at an alarming pace, a reality that would soon bring him face to face with the consequences of his arrogance. A week later, Julian appeared. The man who once strode through boardrooms like a king now stumbled down the sterile hospital corridor like a beggar. The luxurious suits replaced by a rumpled, cheap blazer, shoes scuffed and untied, hair disheveled, a shadow of the man Sarai had once known. The magnitude of his fall was visible in every trembling movement, every desperate glance. And yet he still tried to wield his charm, though it faltered, crumbling under the weight of loss. "Sarai," he called, voice hoarse and strained, catching her arm before she could move past. Instinctively, she froze, feeling the tension in the room tighten like a rope around her chest. "Dr. Jones, Sterling, I'm begging you. I made a mistake. Serafina left me the moment the company started to fall. She took what she could. My father is recovering, but the board is moving. They're stripping me of the CEO role and my inheritance. I am a few weeks from losing everything." Sarai's eyes lifted from her phone. Calm, measured, almost detached. "That is unfortunate, Mr. Sterling," she said, glancing at her watch with meticulous indifference. Her voice carried neither anger nor pity, only a precision that made her words feel like a scalpel slicing through pretense. He caught his breath, leaning closer, voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Sarai, please. You were everything. My mistake was colossal. I want you back. I want my family. I want to be a father to Micah. I'll give you anything. I'll make it right. I'll pay you the 40 million I'm about to lose if you'll just let me back in your life." Tears streamed down his face. Raw, unfiltered emotions spilled from him, the kind that could break lesser women. But Sarai wasn't lesser. She had survived abandonment, betrayal, and humiliation. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes, piece by piece on her terms, by her skill, and with her mind unbroken. The hall was quiet except for his ragged breathing. Security officers shifted uneasily in the background, sensing that something far more potent than confrontation was about to unfold. Sarai stepped back slightly, allowing space but never letting her gaze waver. She did not need to speak loudly. The power she carried did not demand volume, it demanded presence. "This is the problem, Julian," she said, her voice low but edged with authority, the kind that silenced rooms and minds alike. "You believe my worth and the life we built is buyable, that you can simply purchase your way out of disposability." Julian blinked, confusion and fear colliding in his expression. He had never encountered resistance like this. He had always gotten what he wanted through intimidation, charm, or money. Yet here, none of it worked. She was immovable, untouchable, untamed. And for the first time, Julian Sterling confronted a reality he had never imagined. Power had a source other than his wealth, and it could not be bribed, bargained, or coerced. Sarai leaned forward, her presence commanding yet cold, letting the next word strike like a carefully aimed blow. "What you don't know," she said slowly, "is this. The company that is taking over Sterling Global Tech, that exploited the loophole you neglected, the very acquisition you overlooked in haste, the one that is about to cost you your entire legacy." She paused, watching his face pale as comprehension dawned. "It's a shell corporation, funded by early venture capital from the medical patents I own, the ones I acquired while you were playing house with your mistress. You are losing your 100-year-old family company to the 5% equity I earned while you left me to die. Your entire future is being dismantled by the financial engine of the woman you discarded." Julian staggered back, clutching at the edge of the hallway counter, mouth opening and closing in silent disbelief. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, a mask of shock and humiliation overlaying the man who had once commanded boardrooms with a flick of his wrist. His empire, the sterling legacy, the power he had assumed was his by birthright, was crumbling at the hands of someone he had deemed insignificant, someone he had believed disposable. "I don't want your apology, Julian," she continued, her voice rising in controlled power. "I don't want your money. I don't want your regret. I want you to remember this moment. I want it carved into your consciousness that I built my own kingdom, and your failure is simply the natural consequence of your own recklessness, not my revenge." Julian's face twisted, his jaw tightening, his pride and shame colliding in a violent storm. The world he had assumed to be under his control had no bearing here. The woman he once thought powerless had become omnipotent in her own right, a force defined by intellect, skill, and the indestructible will to reclaim her life. Sarai's phone buzzed softly in her hand, reminding her of schedules, meetings, and life beyond the collapsing figure before her. She placed it back in her pocket and straightened, adjusting her tailored suit as though armor had replaced cloth. She did not gloat. She did not shout. She simply existed in the calm eye of consequence, allowing the universe to deliver its justice with elegance. A nurse appeared, hesitant. "Dr. Jones Sterling," she said. Sarai's hand lifted, a subtle gesture. "Security is needed in the hallway. Mr. Sterling is emotionally distressed." The officers moved in silently, guiding Julian away. His shoulders slumped, the weight of failure pressing him into a shell of a man who had once thought himself untouchable. The echo of his defeat lingered, a stark contrast to the quiet, resolute composure of Sarai. As he disappeared from view, Sarai turned toward the elevator, the soft click of her heels on the hospital floor marking her independence. Micah's laughter and the world waiting outside her office were her true victories. Each step she took was a reclamation, a reminder that the greatest revenge is not humiliation inflicted upon others. It is the building of a life so powerful, so complete, that the one who tried to break you becomes irrelevant. And somewhere deep inside, beneath her calm exterior, a small, dangerous spark glimmered. Julian had believed that wealth, influence, and intimidation were the ultimate tools of life. He had not accounted for one thing: the quiet, relentless power of a woman who had been underestimated, betrayed, and yet refused to be diminished. As Sarai walked back to her office, she opened a new email marked urgent from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "You are being watched. Your next move will determine everything." Her pulse quickened. Someone knew about the Shell Corporation. Someone knew exactly what she had done, and they were not sending pleasantries. Weeks had passed since Julian Sterling had been escorted away, defeated and hollowed, and yet the air around Sarai was no less tense. She moved through her hospital corridors with purpose, every step a reminder of the life she had rebuilt. Julian's absence was a quiet victory, but it was not enough to satisfy the deeper currents of justice and self-realization that surged through her. She had survived abandonment, humiliation, and betrayal. Now it was time to define what survival truly meant. Julian had officially lost his position. The board had acted swiftly, aware of his negligence and reckless dealings. The Sterling name, long synonymous with power and prestige, was now publicly fractured. Newspapers and digital platforms dissected every failure, every misstep, painting the once mighty heir as a cautionary tale of arrogance and hubris. Sarai read each report with measured attention. There was no satisfaction in Schadenfreude. Her pleasure came from clarity, from the precise recognition that the life she had reclaimed was entirely her own. Elias Sterling, humbled by the near brush with death, had stepped forward. At a press conference, the patriarch's frail voice carried across television screens and social media feeds worldwide. "Dr. Sarai Jones Sterling saved my life," he said, his words deliberate, a rare humility softening his usual imperious tone. "She is the savior of the Sterling line. Without her skill and resolve, the legacy my family built would have ended in tragedy." The statement spread like wildfire. Medical journals highlighted her surgical prowess. Financial analysts quietly acknowledged her growing influence in medical patents. Social media buzzed with the story of the woman who had been discarded, underestimated, and yet had emerged unbroken, reshaping not only a life but an empire. For Sarai, recognition was incidental. The true reward was autonomy, self-sovereignty, and the quiet knowledge that she no longer needed anyone's validation. Not Julian's, not the Sterling's, not the world's. Despite the chaos left behind, Sarai approached her personal life with the same meticulous care she had applied in surgery. She allowed supervised visits for Julian to see Micah, strictly structured and brief. Each interaction was dictated by the child's well-being, not Julian's entitlement. He was present, yes, but a shadow, a reminder of a past life he could no longer control. Micah's laughter filled the room when Julian arrived, but there was no warmth for the man who had abandoned them. The boy's joy was genuine, unsullied, a product of love, stability, and boundaries firmly drawn. Sarai's heart, though hardened by betrayal, had room for connection. She met Professor Dante Cruz at a medical conference months earlier. Their first conversation had been casual, intellectual, focused on urban planning and ethical design in medical facilities. Dante's charm was understated, his respect palpable. Unlike Julian, he did not attempt to dominate or impress. He listened, challenged, and engaged. Over time, that respect blossomed into trust. Trust deepened into affection, and affection into a partnership grounded in equality. He called her Dr. Jones, never Sterling, a deliberate acknowledgement that he valued her achievements above a name. In Dante, Sarai discovered something profoundly different. Where Julian had sought to diminish, Dante elevated. He celebrated her intellect, admired her decisiveness, and shared in her vision of building something lasting. Together, they envisioned projects that blended aesthetics, functionality, and social impact. Community hospitals, ethical research facilities, and green architecture that prioritized human well-being. Their bond was quiet yet fierce, an undercurrent of mutual respect and shared purpose that neither needed to prove. Sarai reflected on the irony of her journey. Once her life had been defined by dependency, on Julian's approval, on the Sterling family's acceptance, on an illusion of security. Now her story had become a testament to the power of self-determination. Hospitals sought her guidance, corporations consulted her insight, media and academia recognized her as a figure of integrity and resilience. Yet she never sought headlines. Every accolade was a byproduct of skill, discipline, and ethical insistence, not vanity. Her days were structured yet fluid. Mornings were devoted to surgeries that pushed the limits of medical science, tackling rare, complex cardiac cases other surgeons deemed impossible. Afternoons were spent reviewing patent developments, negotiating ethical partnerships, and mentoring young doctors who had, like her, faced systemic underestimation. Evenings belonged to Micah, to laughter, bedtime stories, and gentle guidance. Each moment was purposeful, a thread woven into the fabric of a life reclaimed and fortified. The Sterling family, once omnipotent in her world, had been reduced to distant observers. Julian occasionally appeared at supervised visits, but his presence was hollow, lacking the authority or influence he once wielded. Sarai maintained the boundaries she had learned were essential, love and support for her son, but no platform for a man who had proven unreliable and destructive. Micah thrived in the space she controlled, untainted by the instability of his father's choices. One evening, Sarai sat with Micah in their sunlit living room, observing him arrange toy blocks with a concentration that mirrored her surgical precision. Dante watched from the sofa, sketching designs for a new pediatric wing in a nearby hospital, his eyes occasionally lifting to meet hers with admiration. The moment felt emblematic of everything she had achieved, not through inheritance, not through marriage, but through intellect, discipline, and unyielding self-respect. She had built a fortress of worth around herself, a life immune to the whims and betrayals of others. Her reflection extended beyond personal achievement. The world had begun to see her as more than a surgeon or a mother. She was a case study in ethical leadership, a model of resilience, and a symbol of what could be accomplished when talent was matched with integrity and resolve. Conferences requested her presence. Universities sought her insight. Her equity in patents now drove social impact initiatives that directly benefited underfunded hospitals and research programs. Sarai had transformed betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into leverage, and abandonment into freedom. Yet, even amid this triumphant equilibrium, echoes of Julian's downfall reverberated in subtle ways. Occasionally, she encountered whispers in financial circles, muted discussions about sterling global tech's collapse, Julian's ineptitude, and the anonymous woman whose foresight had redirected the course of a century-old empire. It was a reminder that power could shift quietly, imperceptibly, and that the instruments of control were often invisible. She had learned to wield influence without spectacle, to assert dominance without confrontation, to command respect without coercion. Dante, ever perceptive, noticed her moments of pause. "You think too much about him," he said one evening, gesturing toward a framed photograph of Julian's family at a charity gala that had been sent to her inadvertently. "He's a ghost. Focus on the life you are creating, not the shadow of what he once was." Sarai smiled faintly. "It's not about him anymore," she said. "It's about ensuring that no one, ever, can hold power over me or over Micah in ways they should not." Her eyes lingered on her son, whose laughter now filled the room like music. "That is the ultimate worth, not wealth, not prestige, not recognition. It's the freedom to protect, to build, and to thrive." Yet the story was far from over. Power attracts scrutiny, and influence draws attention. Sarai had dismantled Julian's empire with precision, but in doing so she had inevitably placed herself in the crosshairs of individuals who recognized her capacity for strategy and disruption. The same financial acumen that had allowed her to quietly fund the Shell Corporation, the same intellect that had salvaged lives from impossible odds, now served as a beacon. Allies and adversaries alike took notice, silently recalibrating their strategies in response to the force she had become. Her world had grown complex, layered, and deliberate. She was no longer a participant in someone else's game. She was a player who defined the rules. Ethical leadership, strategic foresight, and emotional discipline had become her currency. Every decision, every interaction, every project she undertook was measured against principles she had forged in the crucible of betrayal. There was satisfaction in this control, a rare kind of joy in knowing that her influence was now an extension of her values rather than her survival. Sarai's reflection extended even to her relationship with Dante. Unlike Julian, he neither sought to overshadow nor control her. Together, they were architects of vision and reality. They discussed projects not for profit alone, but for social impact. They debated ethics, design, and legacy, always circling back to the principles of integrity and responsibility. In Dante, she found partnership not just in heart, but in mind, a rare equilibrium that reinforced her belief in the possibility of balanced, mutually empowering relationships. As weeks turned into months, Sarai consolidated her influence quietly. The hospitals where she practiced adopted policies she had championed. Research funding shifted toward projects she endorsed. Her patents became tools not for personal enrichment, but for systemic improvement. Julian's shadow receded further as the world acknowledged her capabilities, her vision, and her ethical framework. Micah grew under the safe canopy she had built. He witnessed excellence without arrogance, discipline without tyranny, and love without dependency. The boy's development was a mirror to the life she had constructed, rigorous, principled, and resilient. In her quiet moments, watching him explore the world with curiosity and confidence, Sarai understood that true power was generational, ethical, and cultivated, not demanded or inherited. Even the Sterling family, now fractured and diminished, could not ignore her. Their recognition, though begrudging, validated the influence she had amassed. Elias Sterling's endorsement had opened doors, but it was Sarai's own vision and relentless execution that kept them open. Julian's failure, stark and public, stood in contrast to her rise, illustrating a fundamental truth. Power without integrity crumbles. Resilience with purpose endures. And yet, as she navigated this new life, subtle indications emerged that her actions had not gone unnoticed in corridors far beyond the hospital and boardroom. Anonymous communications, discreet inquiries, and unexpected observers hinted that the strategic moves she had executed with precision were now under scrutiny. The Shell Corporation, the patents, the redistribution of assets, all had ripple effects reaching spheres she had not yet fully mapped. It was here, in this delicate intersection of achievement and vigilance, that Sarai's true worth revealed itself. Not in accolades, not in wealth, not in revenge, but in the ability to anticipate, respond, and adapt while maintaining her ethical compass. Every decision was deliberate, every interaction calibrated, and every outcome a reflection of the discipline she had honed since the day Julian abandoned her. The balance she had cultivated was fragile yet resilient. It required constant attention, not for power's sake, but for the protection of the life she had rebuilt. Each day was an exercise in foresight, ethical judgment, and measured action. Sarai understood that influence carried responsibility, and responsibility demanded vigilance. She looked at Micah, whose tiny hands manipulated blocks with concentration, and at Dante, who sketched plans for a pediatric wing designed to revolutionize care in underserved communities. The sight was a testament to what had been forged from betrayal, abandonment, and relentless determination. A life where worth was self-defined, power was earned, and legacy was intentional. Sarai allowed herself a rare smile, not one of triumph over Julian, not one of self-satisfaction, but of recognition. She had survived. She had built. She had thrived. And she had done so without compromising her principles. Every ounce of effort, every sleepless night, every calculated risk had coalesced into a reality she owned completely. Yet beneath the calm exterior, an undercurrent of tension lingered. Her strategies had made her formidable, but someone, somewhere, had taken note. The Shell Corporation, the patents, her influence over medical tech investments, these were not invisible actions. And in the quiet spaces of power, observation often precedes confrontation. Late one evening, as Sarai reviewed architectural plans for Dante's new hospital wing, her encrypted phone vibrated with an urgent notification. A single line appeared. "We know what you did with Sterling Global Tech. Stop before it's too late." Her fingers hovered above the screen, pulse quickening. Someone had discovered her maneuvers. Someone was watching, and the game she thought she controlled might already have new players she had not anticipated. Sarai sat in the quiet of her home office, the glow of her laptop illuminating her sharp, composed face. Micah slept peacefully in the adjoining room, and Dante had just stepped out to meet a contractor for the new pediatric wing he was designing. For the first time in months, Sarai allowed herself a single moment of stillness, a pause in the relentless rhythm of her life. Then the file arrived, small, unassuming, yet heavy with implication. The envelope had no return address, only her private investigator's discreet insignia. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The contents were immediate, precise, and insidious. Serafina's offshore trust. $10 million. Transferred weeks before Julian's empire began its dramatic collapse. The transaction was clean, legal, and meticulously timed. Sarai's mind raced. Julian had been reckless, yes, but Serafina's departure was deliberate, coordinated, calculated. There was an order to this chaos that stretched beyond Julian's recklessness. It was a symphony of manipulation, conducted by people who knew exactly what they were doing. She read the details twice, thrice, the implications crystallizing like shards of glass in her mind. The trust was registered under an address connected to Eleanor Sterling's secondary charity, an entity long considered a benign front for philanthropic endeavors. Sarai had always known Eleanor to be meticulous, even cold, but this was orchestration at a corporate, strategic level. Every detail in the file pointed toward the same conclusion. Julian's betrayal had been only a fragment of the plan. The larger scheme, the real architecture of abandonment, had been orchestrated by the Sterling apparatus. Her chest tightened. The woman who had once dismissed her, who had orchestrated Julian's departure from any ethical or emotional accountability, had played a long game. Eleanor Sterling had ensured that Sarai's existence during the divorce posed no threat, that her child, her wealth, and her autonomy would be circumscribed in a way that appeared accidental, but was, in reality, deliberate. The cruelty was systematic, corporate, and precise. It was the kind of control that left no room for error or escape. Sarai leaned back, the chair creaking under her weight, and allowed herself a long exhale. She had faced betrayal before, but this was different. Julian's impulsiveness had ended. Serafina's disappearance had been planned. The Sterling family had positioned themselves like chess masters, each move designed to constrain her power. And yet, Sarai realized, they had underestimated her resilience. They had presumed that fear or frustration would deter her. They had presumed she would accept their manipulations as inevitable. Instead, Sarai had learned to anticipate. She had survived Julian's abandonment. She had rebuilt her career, her reputation, and her financial influence. She had transformed vulnerability into strategy. And now she would confront this lingering threat, not with anger, not with impulsive retaliation, but with precision, foresight, and leverage. Her first step was verification. Sarai called in a trusted colleague from her medical patent network, an expert in international finance and corporate compliance. They confirmed the offshore trust's legitimacy and its timing. 3 weeks before the public collapse of Sterling Global Tech, with every clause, fee, and transfer executed flawlessly. Sarai's suspicions were not paranoia. They were accurate. This was strategy, and it was deliberate. Next came the analysis of intent. Why pay Serafina before Julian fell? Why ensure the mistress left without leaving a trace? The answer was terrifyingly simple: containment. The Sterlings had calculated that if Sarai's life remained uninterrupted, if she were isolated and unarmed in terms of corporate leverage, they could neutralize her. They had underestimated her ingenuity, her network, and her moral acuity. The family had assumed that money, power, and calculated exclusion would be sufficient. Sarai's mind shifted to Micah. Her son had been born into chaos, yet she had protected him. She had become the sole architect of his safety, growth, and happiness. This new discovery intensified her resolve. If the Sterlings thought they could continue to manipulate her child's life from the shadows, they were gravely mistaken. The stakes were no longer financial, they were familial, ethical, and existential. She spent the next hours mapping the structure of the conspiracy. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, legal documents, and financial transfers all revealed a lattice of control designed to isolate, intimidate, and constrain. Each revelation felt like uncovering a layer of a trap she had narrowly avoided. Sarai realized that every action she had taken since Julian's departure, the shell corporation she had funded, her strategic acquisition of patents, her financial independence, had not only preserved her autonomy, but had created a counterweight to the Sterling influence. Her thoughts returned to Julian. The man she had once loved had been reckless, foolish, but fundamentally human in his flaws. Serafina had been premeditated, Eleanor had been strategic, and yet all of them had underestimated one element: Sarai's capacity to integrate moral purpose with tactical precision. Every decision, every patent, every surgical breakthrough had been a preparation she had not consciously recognized until this moment. Her life was not just rebuilt, it was fortified against manipulation, corruption, and betrayal. As she sifted through the files, she noted one anomaly: a single entry in the offshore trust referenced a location that did not match any of Eleanor's known addresses. It was subtle, almost invisible, hidden within the vast array of transactions. The handwriting on the scanned document was typed, precise, corporate, but the coordinates it referenced hinted at an asset not publicly disclosed. Sarai's pulse quickened. Could it be another layer, another contingency she had not anticipated? She picked up her secure phone and sent a single encrypted message to her investigator. Track the coordinates. Full asset disclosure. I need names, movements, and all connections. She didn't wait for a response. Her intuition told her that time was critical. The lingering threat was active, watching, calculating, waiting for a misstep. And missteps, she knew, were costly. Hours later, Sarai reviewed the additional intelligence. Serafina's movements had been choreographed meticulously. She had vanished from public view, her life a shadow controlled by contractual and financial levers. Each step taken in the weeks before Julian's downfall had been deliberate, timed, and precise. The offshore trust had been only one element of a multi-tiered plan designed to manipulate perception, contain risk, and erase accountability. Sarai leaned back, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that always preceded decisive action. This was no longer about Julian. This was no longer about Serafina. This was about a calculated system of control, one that sought to influence her life, her son's life, and potentially the trajectory of every decision she had painstakingly made. She thought about Dante. The professor had trusted her implicitly, admired her vision, and supported her work, but he did not yet know the full depth of this orchestrated threat. Involving him prematurely could compromise operational security. She needed to act alone, with strategy and precision, neutralizing the danger before it could manifest in tangible harm. Sarai traced the legal frameworks underpinning the offshore trust and Eleanor's secondary charity. She noted loopholes, redundancies, and vulnerabilities. The structure that had been designed to control her had one critical flaw. It relied on secrecy, predictability, and the assumption of passivity. Sarai had proven, repeatedly, that she was neither secretive in compliance nor passive in response. Every action they had taken had inadvertently created vulnerabilities she could now exploit. Her mind raced with options. A direct confrontation with Eleanor risked exposure. Legal action alone could be circumvented. The most effective strategy would be multi-pronged: forensic analysis, financial leverage, and operational observation. She would need to anticipate their moves, predict their calculations, and maintain moral and ethical clarity while dismantling the layers of manipulation. Night deepened, and the office grew quiet except for the soft hum of the laptop. Micah's breathing, steady and serene, reminded her of why every decision mattered. This was no longer merely a battle of ego or revenge. It was a protective ethical imperative. Her son's life, her autonomy, and the integrity of her carefully constructed world were at stake. Hours passed, documents were reviewed, calls encrypted, patterns emerged. The offshore trust was part of a contingency plan for the Sterling's assets, a plan to consolidate power even as Julian's recklessness threatened to undo them. Serafina's disappearance had been timed with the collapse of Julian's company to minimize public scrutiny and prevent Sarai from leveraging her own legal and financial position. The deeper Sarai dug, the more she understood the scale of the operation. It was not a single act of betrayal. It was an ongoing system of containment, a carefully constructed apparatus of influence and control designed to manipulate outcomes and eliminate variables that might favor her. And yet, as she reviewed the last line of the report, a subtle detail sent a shiver through her spine. A name, one she did not recognize. A player who had been invisible in every prior calculation, who had slipped through every layer of observation. Someone who had access to the inner mechanisms of the Sterling apparatus and had orchestrated elements without leaving a trace for Sarai's investigator. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised, tense. Whoever this was, they were powerful, patient, and intelligent, and they had not yet revealed themselves fully. Sarai leaned back, her eyes narrowing. The realization crystallized. This lingering threat was far from neutralized. They had not miscalculated her skill, they had underestimated her vigilance, but their patience and resources made them dangerous. The game she thought she controlled now had a hidden player, one whose moves were invisible, yet whose influence could reshape the entire board. She closed the file slowly, her mind already strategizing. The rules had changed, the game had evolved, and the cost of miscalculation was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, personal, and potentially devastating. A soft chime from her secure phone cut through the silence. An anonymous message blinked on the screen. "You've seen only the surface, Dr. Jones. The depth of the Sterling apparatus is far greater than you realize. Every move you make is being watched. Proceed carefully, or lose everything you hold dear." Sarai's pulse surged. Someone was inside the web. Someone was orchestrating from the shadows. And for the first time, she knew the lingering threat was more immediate and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Sarai stepped out of the sterile, sunlit conference room and closed the door behind her, the weight of Eleanor's confession settling into her bones like a physical presence. She walked slowly down the marble hallway, her heels clicking with deliberate precision. Every sound echoed in her mind, mingling with the revelation she had just received. Her grip on the file tightened, not the documents themselves, but the understanding of how meticulously her life had been manipulated, how her autonomy had been toyed with like a fragile chess piece in the Sterling family's cold game. Her mind raced, dissecting every decision Eleanor had confessed to, every layer of betrayal. Julian had been reckless, yes, but he had been a pawn. Serafina had been bought off, yes, but she was merely a tool. The true architect of her suffering was Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch whose charm had masked cruelty and calculation. The magnitude of the deception, the careful timing, the premeditated orchestration of her abandonment, and the attempted theft of Micah. It was staggering. Sarai found herself standing in front of the large, arched window that overlooked the city skyline. The late afternoon sun spilled through, illuminating dust motes in the air. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe, to let the anger, the fear, and the betrayal settle. She thought of Micah, her son, sleeping peacefully upstairs. He was unaware of the depths of the darkness his grandparents had tried to pull over their lives. He would never know the precariousness of his first months, the intricate plotting that had surrounded him before he even drew his first breath. Her hands unclenched around the edge of the windowsill. She had always been precise, methodical, a surgeon trained to read the human heart, both literally and metaphorically. Now she was analyzing a different kind of heart, one wrapped in arrogance, fear, and greed. Eleanor Sterling's heart was not human in the way most people understood. It beat with strategy, self-interest, and a willingness to sacrifice others to protect a legacy. Sarai could feel the cold calculations in her blood, the way she had been manipulated to serve as a temporary vessel, an incubator for an heir, while her life and happiness were considered expendable. Sarai's thoughts turned inward. She remembered those nights immediately after Micah's birth, when the hospital room had felt both sanctuary and cage. She remembered the silver-haired Dr. Reed, who had offered guidance, compassion, and an unwavering belief in Sarai's potential, even as the world outside had attempted to diminish her. Dr. Reed had told her that love was elevation, not diminishment. Sarai had clung to that truth, even as Julian walked past her like she were invisible, even as Eleanor's shadow loomed over every decision. The realization came in sharp clarity now. She had been underestimated. She had been treated as disposable, yet she had endured. She had been stripped of security, abandoned in labor, yet she had fought. Every stitch she had sewn, every late night spent in the hospital, every moment of sacrifice for Micah had been preparation for this moment. The moment when she understood not only the scope of the Sterling deception, but the power she now wielded in contrast. Sarai moved to her desk, a custom piece she had designed herself, simple but formidable, reflecting her life's philosophy: elegance, precision, and power. She laid the offshore trust documents flat, the typed lines of numbers and legal jargon suddenly infused with narrative, a story of manipulation, greed, and betrayal. She traced the names and addresses with her finger, connecting dots in her mind. Eleanor's secondary charity, the offshore trust, the timing of Seraphina's payment, all meticulously aligned. The web of control was vast, yet it now existed fully in Sarai's awareness. She had the knowledge, the leverage, and the moral clarity to ensure that none of them would ever endanger her son again. Her phone buzzed, a message from Dante Cruz, calm and steady, a reminder of the life she had begun to rebuild. She smiled faintly at the screen, feeling the warmth of a partnership built on respect, intellect, and mutual understanding. He had no idea what she had just learned, and she didn't intend to share the full magnitude yet. This was her fight, her battle, her reckoning. Dante's world would intersect with the Sterling's only when she chose, on her terms. Sarai leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she considered Eleanor Sterling. The older woman's power had once been absolute, her social influence a weapon. Now, stripped of wealth, reliant on her consent to access Micah, Eleanor was vulnerable. And yet she was still dangerous. She was clever, accustomed to maneuvering in corridors of power, capable of subtle influence. Underestimating her would be a mistake Sarai could not afford. But unlike Julian or Seraphina, Eleanor had not been completely reckless. Her strategy had layers, and Sarai needed to plan carefully, not react impulsively. The thought of strategy made Sarai smile faintly. Her surgical mind translated naturally into corporate maneuvering. Every decision, every action could be calculated, precise, and effective. She could anticipate moves before they were made, predict reactions, and control outcomes. The offshore trust was no longer a threat. It was a blueprint. She could use it, leverage it, and neutralize it without ever stooping to their level of malice. Micah's safety, Julian's impotence, and Eleanor's dependence were now tools of justice, not revenge. Sarai's phone buzzed again. This time it was a video of Micah drawing with crayons, oblivious to the storm that had shaped his entry into the world. The innocence, the laughter, the small achievements of her son reminded her why she could not allow herself to be consumed by hatred. Her power, her wealth, her intelligence. They existed to protect, to elevate, to correct the injustices done. She would be the force that ensured no one could manipulate her child's life ever again. Hours passed. Sarai traced financial flows, legal documents, and corporate charts. Each line connected, each number told a story, and each revelation tightened her resolve. She constructed mental scenarios. What if Eleanor tried to regain influence? What if Julian, in desperation, attempted another maneuver? What if Serafina resurfaced? Each possibility was countered with preemptive action in her mind. She was no longer a woman reacting to circumstance. She was a strategist, a protector, a force that commanded outcomes. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the room. Sarai poured herself a cup of tea, its warmth grounding her. The city outside had no knowledge of the private war that had just been recalibrated. The Sterlings believed they still had control, but Sarai now held the truth. And the truth was a weapon sharper than any sword. She would allow them moments of illusion, a false sense of security, while she built an unassailable fortress around Micah and her life. A knock came at the door, sudden and polite. Sarai looked up. One of her legal aides entered, a young woman with crisp efficiency, holding a folder of documents. Dr. Jones Sterling, we've begun drafting the legal framework to formalize Micah's protections and your oversight of visitation. Also, the offshore trust exposure has been prepared for presentation if needed. Sarai nodded, her mind already racing ahead. Every legal clause, every contingency, every possible loophole would be sealed. She had learned the hard way that the world would exploit even the smallest gap in her defenses. Julian had been reckless, Serafina had been calculated, and Eleanor had been cunning. She would be all three, precise, patient, and unyielding. Night fell. The city lights glimmered like distant stars, and Sarai sat back in her chair, reviewing every piece of evidence once more. Eleanor Sterling had believed she controlled the board, the family, the fate of her grandson. Now Eleanor was a spectator in a game she no longer understood, a game orchestrated by the very person she had underestimated, Sarai. Her thoughts drifted to the potential next moves of her adversaries. She would allow them small victories, trivial illusions, but every significant attempt to destabilize her or her son would be anticipated and neutralized. Every call, every action, every financial move was now visible to her, thanks to careful surveillance and strategic insight. Sarai rose from her chair, stretching slightly. The weight of vigilance was heavy, but she welcomed it. For the first time since Micah's birth, she felt entirely in control. Her son's future would not be a casualty of Sterling ambition or greed. Julian's failures, Eleanor's manipulations, and Serafina's schemes would crumble against the calculated might of a mother who refused to be defeated again. She walked to the window one last time before retiring, looking down at the bustling city streets below. Life moved forward, ignorant of the private justice being constructed above it. Sarai allowed herself a small smile, not of joy, but of quiet satisfaction. The fortress around her son was nearly complete, and every stone had been laid with intention. She placed the folder of evidence back into her locked cabinet, the key turned twice for certainty. Eleanor Sterling had underestimated her, and that mistake would resonate for years. Sarai would act, but on her own terms. Every strategy, every legal motion, every personal interaction would be measured, precise, and impactful. As she turned toward the staircase, ready to ascend to Micah's room, a sudden thought struck her, a variable she had not anticipated. Serafina might not have disappeared entirely. The $10 million trust payment ensured her silence temporarily, but human greed and resentment were unpredictable. Could Serafina resurface in a way that endangered Micah or her new life? Could Julian, driven by desperation and pride, manipulate her or the courts further? The possibilities gnawed at Sarai's mind, reminding her that control was never absolute. Her pulse quickened slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Every chess piece was now in motion, and the next move might come from an unexpected corner. Sarai's eyes hardened. She would not be caught off guard, not now, not ever. The city hummed below her, oblivious. The quiet, controlled environment of her home was now a war room of intellect, strategy, and maternal determination. Every ounce of betrayal she had endured was transmuted into fuel, into insight, into a shield for the life she had fought so hard to protect. And then the thought came, cold and sharp. There was one aspect she had yet to uncover, one secret that could still shift the balance of power. Eleanor's confession had peeled back layers, but human ambition was rarely fully exposed. Somewhere in the hidden corridors of the Sterling world, there might yet exist a plan, a move, a trap she had not foreseen. Sarai took a deep breath, steadying herself. She would face it if and when it arrived, but for now she would consolidate, strategize, and fortify. Every decision, every action, every second mattered. The battle was not over, but she had already won the first rounds with precision, intelligence, and unyielding strength. She glanced toward Micah's room where a faint light glowed under the door. He was safe. For now, that was everything. And yet, the uncertainty of what could come next lingered, a shadow she could not ignore, a tension threading through her chest. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else. I will not be outmaneuvered, not by them, not by anyone. Micah is mine to protect, and I will not fail. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Dante, asking if she was ready for dinner. Sarai allowed herself a brief pause, considering the balance of normal life and the storm she had just navigated. But even in that normalcy, her mind was still alert, still calculating. The night deepened, and Sarai finally climbed the stairs to her son's room, placing her hand gently on his head. She lingered there, feeling the warmth of life she had fought to protect. But in the corner of her mind, the tension remained, a reminder that vigilance was eternal. The cliffhanger. As Sarai turned off the light and prepared to leave, her phone rang once more. This time, the number was unknown. She answered cautiously. A voice, distorted and unfamiliar, whispered 3 words that made her blood run cold. We know everything. Julian Sterling's desperation had reached a new edge, sharp enough to cut through the careful equilibrium Sarai had painstakingly built. He had glimpsed the quiet comfort between Sarai and Dante Cruz, observed with the naked vulnerability of a man stripped of entitlement, the ease with which Micah now laughed and ran across the sunlit living room of the home that Sarai had earned entirely on her own. The realization was brutal. She had rebuilt her world without him. She had forged an existence of power and love, while he clung to a fraction of a past he could no longer manipulate. His pride, a fragile artifact of a former empire, refused to accept that Micah's laughter did not belong to him as dominion. The call to his lawyer came late one night, the hum of the city outside his modest apartment, a dissonant soundtrack to his unraveling. File for custody, Julian demanded, his voice tight, brittle. Shared custody. Cite my improved circumstances. I want access to Micah. I will not be frozen out. The words were measured yet desperate, as though repeating them might make them real. He had no income that could match Sarai's, no residence worthy of stability, and yet His lawyer nodded, legal reasoning stripped down to the bare bones of strategy. The father must fight. The filing shook the foundations of Sarai's week. For a moment she allowed herself a brief exhale, not fear but acknowledgement. Julian's move was predictable, almost mechanically rehearsed, but it was also the first time in years he had actually shown initiative. She had anticipated this, accounted for it, and she prepared to respond with precision surgical in its clarity. She did not hire a family law firm. She summoned a corporate litigation powerhouse, a team usually reserved for hostile takeovers and billion-dollar fiduciary disputes. Julian was about to learn that a mother, a surgeon, and an empire builder could treat custody battles with the same ruthless efficiency as corporate warfare. The court date arrived with an air of subdued tension. Sarai entered the room dressed in charcoal gray, her posture impeccable, her presence a quiet assertion of authority. Julian arrived minutes later, sleeves rumpled, face pale, lawyer in tow, projecting an image of cautious defiance that barely masked exhaustion. He would speak, plead, argue, but Sarai had prepared an arsenal far beyond words. Evidence was presented in a manner that left the courtroom murmuring. Every document Sarai submitted told a story of responsibility, precision, and a life governed by accountability. Her hospital contracts, her employment clauses, the on-site daycare records, and the professional references from colleagues, supervisors, and patients, each one meticulously catalogued, constructed a narrative far stronger than Julian's desperate attempts to assert competency. Every detail of Micah's life was laid bare, a framework of care and stability that no man who had squandered wealth and influence could replicate. The masterstroke was subtle, yet damning. Sarai's team presented the financial data and operational records, proving that Julian's offshore dealings, his neglect of company acquisitions, and the secret payments to Serafina had destabilized not only his family fortune, but also his personal reliability. "We are not here to attack Mr. Sterling personally," her attorney said, voice coldly analytical, "but to demonstrate that the plaintiff's history directly correlates to instability, both financial and emotional. Custody decisions must prioritize the child, not the guilt or pleas of a failing parent." Sarai observed Julian's reactions closely. The man who had once commanded rooms with presence now flinched under scrutiny, the courtroom lights exposing his vulnerability. He attempted to counter, citing Sarai's demanding surgical schedule, 12-hour days, frequent international consultations, hospital emergencies. He framed it as neglect. The room held its collective breath. The rebuttal, when it came, was surgical. The evidence of Micah's care, secure, professional, monitored by full-time pediatric staff, was presented alongside photographs, schedules, and testimonies. It was a fortress of proof. Even the judge's stern eyes betrayed the acknowledgement of its strength. The lawyer leaned in, voice steady. "Your Honor, Dr. Jones's work hours are not an absence, but a framework of safety and high-level oversight. Her son is cared for, nurtured, and secure in ways Mr. Sterling cannot provide. Supervised visitation, limited to environments where professional oversight ensures emotional and physical stability, is the only responsible course." The argument landed with the weight of inevitability. Julian's face paled further as the financial implications were revealed. His modest allowance from Eleanor Sterling was insufficient to fund the kind of life Micah now enjoyed. Any attempt to argue for expanded custody would expose gaps, vulnerabilities, and lapses in his ability to meet the child's needs. The court saw a father with intent but without capacity, a man undone by hubris and circumstance. Minutes stretched into hours, arguments repeated, motions filed, counter-arguments raised. Sarai remained calm throughout, her hands folded, eyes steady on the judge, but her mind never wavered from one core priority: Micah's protection. Every motion she had anticipated, every plea Julian might offer, had already been countered by precision preparation. There was no bluff she could not read, no emotional appeal that would override documented evidence. She understood the currency of power and how to wield it without cruelty, and in this courtroom, that knowledge was absolute. When the judge finally spoke, the words reverberated like a gavel of finality. Julian Sterling was granted strictly limited, supervised visitation. Nominal child support was mandated, a symbolic echo of his lost autonomy. The courtroom felt suspended for a moment, the reality of Sarai's triumph settling quietly but with undeniable authority. Julian's eyes met hers across the room, a flicker of rage, confusion, and humiliation briefly crossing his features before the weight of the ruling pressed down. Yet the final twist came quietly, almost imperceptibly. Among the documents filed by Sarai's team was a hidden note, an encrypted file included in the legal packet. No one had seen it, not Julian, not his attorney, not the judge. It was a single line, yet it carried a power that even Julian, in his broken state, could not anticipate. The file detailed every hidden financial maneuver he had made, every offshore account, every misstep that had contributed to his downfall, all tied to the Serafina payoff and Eleanor's schemes. Sarai had ensured that his reach was limited, not only physically but financially, and that any future attempt to leverage Micah against her would be met with overwhelming proof of his own culpability. As the courtroom emptied, Julian lingered, his eyes fixed on Sarai. There was no malice, no pleadings, no words left. The man who had once believed he could control her through wealth, charm, or entitlement now understood that his power was a memory. She had not only defended her son, but had extended the invisible architecture of dominance, a lattice of security, knowledge, and ethical authority that he could never penetrate. Sarai walked out, Micah safely in her arms, Dante waiting quietly outside. The city sunlight hit them as she stepped onto the courthouse steps, the air crisp with both victory and vigilance. She had protected what mattered, and in doing so she had shown Julian the true cost of attempting to reclaim what he had never earned. But as she rounded the corner, her private investigator approached discreetly, leaning close with a shadowed look she immediately recognized. "Dr. Jones, there's something you need to see. It's about Serafina. It appears her departure wasn't as clean as we thought. She's back in play." Sarai's heart tightened, her mind racing. She had won the courtroom battle, yet a new storm was gathering, just beyond the horizon. Her victory, formidable as it was, might only be the beginning, the cliffhanger. Sarai turned to look at the investigator, her voice steady but taut with tension. "Show me." And in that moment she realized the legal battle was over, but the real war, the one against the unseen manipulations of the Sterling family and Serafina, was just beginning. Sarai turned her gaze toward the investigator, steadying her breathing. "Show me," she said. The city sounds behind them, the faint rumble of traffic, the muted clatter of pedestrian footsteps, felt distant, irrelevant. Her mind was already calculating, already running scenarios, already weighing options. She had spent years learning to anticipate, to see the invisible threads of manipulation, and now she knew the game was far from over. The investigator handed her a slim, encrypted tablet. "We traced Serafina's movements after the separation fee. She didn't just vanish. She set up a series of shell companies and offshore accounts that no one in the Sterling Circle knew about. And she's moving again, quickly." Sarai's eyes narrowed. "Moving toward what?" she asked, though she already felt the answer gnawing at her logic. She could see the pattern, the calculated steps, the orchestration, the echo of Eleanor's own manipulation. Serafina was no random opportunist. She was an architect of chaos. She's making demands, the investigator said, voice low. She's asking for more than the original payout, and she's leveraging information about Julian that could be damaging if it got out. And it's not just about money, it's about access. Access to the Sterling legacy, and indirectly, Micah. Sarai clenched her jaw, the muscles tightening with controlled fury. The idea that anyone would try to compromise her son or destabilize the careful equilibrium she had built was intolerable. But more than fury, there was the thrill of strategy, the recognition that this was exactly the kind of problem she thrived on solving. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She calculated. "I need a full profile," she said, voice calm, sharp. "Every financial transfer, every communication, every contact. I want to know who's helping her, who's watching Julian, and what leverage she actually has." She paused, letting the weight of the order sink in. "And I want it yesterday." The investigator nodded. "Already in progress, but there's more." He hesitated. "Dante should know, but I don't think you should confront him yet." Sarai's chest tightened for an instant. Dante. She allowed herself a brief second to picture him, patient, steady, the rare kind of man who saw her brilliance and never felt threatened by it. She thought about Micah laughing in the sunlit kitchen, Dante's hand brushing hers casually, the sense of stability he brought to a life that had once been defined by chaos. She couldn't jeopardize that with premature revelations. Not yet. Instead, she focused on the threat. Serafina had been paid off and removed for a reason, yet here she was, orchestrating a return. The calculated precision of her movements suggested that someone was guiding her, providing resources, ensuring that no misstep would compromise her leverage. Sarai's mind raced through possibilities, mapping the web of alliances, the potential gaps, the weaknesses. She realized almost instantly that the key wasn't confrontation. The key was control, anticipation, preemption. She needed to anticipate Serafina's moves, predict her demands, and neutralize them before they reached the point of real danger. And she needed allies, unexpected, discreet, and trustworthy allies, allies who could move with subtlety and influence without drawing attention. Sarai knew exactly whom to turn to. Not Dante, not yet, but someone who had been quietly monitoring the Sterling Empire's remnants and had access to the shadowy corners of corporate maneuvering. Someone with the intellect to predict human greed and the discretion to act invisibly. The next day, she arranged a meeting. It was quiet in a small, unassuming office lined with technical books and architectural blueprints, a neutral space where strategy could unfold without fanfare. Dante was there, of course, curious but unaware of the specifics. Sarai watched him, appreciating the calm steadiness in his gaze, but she didn't reveal the threat. Not yet. Her new ally arrived, a figure unknown to Julian, to Serafina, even to Eleanor. A discreet consultant with access to international financial intelligence, someone who had seen the rise and fall of countless fortunes and who understood the psychology of desperation and leverage. They had a reputation for ethical precision, for moving like a ghost in the systems that most people couldn't even comprehend. Sarai explained the situation briefly, without revealing unnecessary details. By the end of the meeting, a plan was taking shape. Sarai would gather direct evidence of Serafina's movements, her shell corporations, her financial tracks. Dante would provide discreet logistical support, keeping their operations seamless, invisible, and untraceable. The consultant would map the network, identify weaknesses, and ensure that any leverage Serafina believed she held could be countered before it became actionable. But there was an unexpected twist hidden in the initial data. Among the shell accounts and offshore transfers, Sarai noticed one particularly troubling detail: a series of encrypted communications between Serafina and a name she had not anticipated, Someone within the sterling inner circle who had always remained in the shadows, someone who had a vested interest in destabilizing her, someone who had resources and influence far beyond the immediate threat of Serafina herself. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the exhilaration of challenge. She realized that while she had prepared for Julian's recklessness, for Eleanor's manipulations, for Serafina's calculated greed, she had not anticipated that a new, hidden player could be orchestrating events from within the family she had once married into. Sarai leaned back in her chair, scanning the encrypted files again, her mind weaving through the possibilities, calculating contingencies, anticipating deception. Every layer of this new game revealed more complexity, more danger, but also more opportunity to assert control, to protect Micah, and to ensure that no past betrayal could ever touch her again. That evening, Sarai returned home, Dante by her side, unaware of the magnitude of the storm gathering beyond the ordinary world. Micah was asleep in his room, the quiet rhythm of his breathing a reminder of what she was protecting. Sarai stood by the window, watching the city lights blink like distant beacons, her mind alive with strategy, foresight, and the careful orchestration of moves that would neutralize the threat before it became a crisis. And then her phone vibrated with an anonymous message. "You think you've seen all the cards. You haven't. The game has just begun." Sarai's jaw tightened. The warning was precise, chilling, and utterly unmistakable. Someone was testing her, probing her defenses and watching her responses. She didn't panic. She smiled slightly, a curve of confidence edged with steel. The game had changed, yes, but she had never been one to lose. She would not falter. She would not retreat. And she would not allow her son, or the life she had rebuilt, to be threatened by anyone. Sarai set her phone down, fingers brushing the encrypted files, the cityscape reflected in her eyes. She whispered to herself, "Then let them come. I've been ready for this my entire life." And in that instant she understood that the coming confrontation would demand not only strategy and precision, but also a truth she had never admitted to anyone. Not Dante, not Micah, not even herself. The real danger was far closer than she had ever imagined. Sarai stared at the message, her mind a storm of calculations and restraint. Julian's number was blocked, yet somehow he had found a way to reach her. The voice on the line was tentative, fragmented, haunted. I I need your help," Julian whispered, his words trembling. There was a long pause. "It's not about money. It's about truth. About writing something before it's too late." Sarai's grip on the phone tightened. She knew the tone all too well, the combination of desperation, fear, and accountability that only comes when a person finally sees the wreckage of their own actions. But she didn't rush. She let him linger in that space, knowing that this moment, raw and unguarded, was as revealing as any legal document. "What truth?" she asked, her voice steady, measured, carrying the weight of experience, intellect, and authority. There was no anger in it, only clarity. Julian swallowed audibly, and the sound was almost audible even through the receiver. "It's Serafina. She didn't just leave with money. She's made things complicated. Things I can't fix on my own. You're the only one who can help." Sarai's pulse quickened. She had anticipated threats, manipulations, corporate maneuvers, custody battles. But not this. Not another child. Not another consequence of Julian's choices that he couldn't handle himself. "Explain," she said simply. Her mind was already cataloging the possible ramifications. Legal, emotional, financial. The implications stretched across years of consequence, all of which she had learned to anticipate and control. She she had a child," Julian admitted, his voice breaking. "6 months after I left you. Hope. Her name is Hope. I I can't provide for her. I can't protect her from Serafina." She's threatening to take everything from me. I don't have the means. I don't have the leverage. You're the only one who acts from a place of worth. You're the only one who can make this right." Sarai exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the confession settle over her. She had always known Julian's recklessness would ripple outward. She had expected consequences, but not in this form. Not a new child, innocent, vulnerable, already entwined in the chaos of Julian's failure. "You want me to intervene," she said, her tone sharp, precise. "Not because of him, not because of any obligation, but because he's failed. Again, and because hope is helpless in this web." "Yes," Julian whispered. His voice carried the barest echo of humility, stripped of arrogance, stripped of entitlement, stripped of the illusion that money or status could command forgiveness. You're the only one who can protect her. You have to. Please, Sarai." Sarai considered the implications. There were legal ramifications, emotional turbulence, strategic moves to ensure no one, Julian, Serafina, Eleanor, could exploit the situation. She knew she couldn't just act from pity. This required precision, foresight, and absolute control. "I will help," she said finally. "But you must understand something. This isn't about forgiveness. It's not about buying my mercy. It's about accountability. You will not manipulate me. You will not compromise the child. And you will act responsibly, or you will have no part of this process." There was silence on the other end. She could hear Julian swallowing, shaking, absorbing the gravity of her conditions. Finally, he whispered, I understand. Thank you. Thank you, Sarai." Sarai hung up and immediately began assembling her team. She called her legal counsel, her private investigator, and her network of discreet contacts who specialized in delicate, high-stakes family matters. She instructed them with precise, unyielding authority. Every move must be controlled, every outcome anticipated, and every risk mitigated. Her mind raced through possible scenarios. Serafina's leverage had always been money and information. Hope introduced a new variable, a living, breathing complication that could tip the balance of power in unexpected ways. She needed to secure paternity documentation, ensure the child's legal protection, and create a framework where neither Serafina nor Julian could exploit loopholes. Hours passed. By midnight, Sarai had constructed a meticulous strategy. Legal filings were prepared, private settlements outlined, and contingency plans for every conceivable scenario developed. She mapped out Julian's capacity for compliance and his historical patterns of recklessness. Every step, every possibility, every potential manipulation had been accounted for. But she also allowed herself a moment to breathe, to visualize the child's life once this was resolved. A stable environment, safe and secure, a future untarnished by parental misjudgment. She could see herself negotiating with Serafina, not as an adversary, but as an orchestrator of order, controlling chaos with intelligence and foresight. The next morning, she met Julian at a neutral office, a place far removed from hospital corridors, the Sterling mansion, and her own home. He looked smaller than ever, hollowed by financial collapse, humiliation, and now the helplessness of a father unable to protect his child. The lines of arrogance that had defined him for years were gone, replaced by a fragile, anxious humility. "You understand the stakes?" Sarai asked, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "Hope's welfare is non-negotiable. Her safety, her security, her stability, they come first. You will comply fully. You will provide everything necessary. Any deviation, and your access is revoked entirely." Julian nodded, eyes wide, and for the first time she saw genuine understanding. Not entitlement, not anger, not arrogance, but comprehension of the consequences of his actions. The twist came when Sarai's investigator reported that Serafina had anticipated intervention. She had moved assets, secured legal loopholes, and engaged external counsel capable of complex offshore maneuvers. This wasn't just Julian's recklessness, it was Serafina's calculation, the cunning of someone who had learned to manipulate men like Julian for her gain. Sarai smiled faintly, her mind already racing through countermeasures. She would neutralize the threat, not with brute force, not with vengeance, but with strategy, foresight, and ethical precision. The irony of this moment was exquisite. The man who had once abandoned her, the woman who had exploited him, and now the innocent child caught in the middle. She alone held the ability to restore balance. Julian watched, helpless, as she coordinated calls, drafted legal frameworks, and outlined steps to ensure Hope's security. The humiliation of his position was complete, but it was not vengeance that guided her hand. It was the meticulous execution of responsibility and moral authority. By nightfall, arrangements were in place. Hope's legal protection was secured, her environment stabilized, and Julian had been instructed in his responsibilities and limitations. Sarai had not just intervened, she had taken control of the narrative entirely, neutralizing chaos before it could manifest. As she left the office, she reflected on the irony of the situation. Julian had returned not begging for love, nor for forgiveness, but for guidance, intervention, and structure, the very qualities he had once dismissed in her. The roles were reversed entirely, and the symmetry of justice, quiet and deliberate, was profoundly satisfying. But as she stepped outside, her phone vibrated. A new anonymous message appeared. "This is only the beginning. You think you've secured the child, but there is someone even closer to you than you realize. Watching, waiting." Sarai's heart did not race in panic. Her mind sharpened, instincts honed. She understood immediately. The challenge was no longer Julian or Serafina alone. Someone within her sphere, someone trusted or assumed safe, was now a variable. Sarai looked up at the darkening skyline, a storm brewing over the city, and whispered, "Then it's time I meet this ghost face to face." Her eyes narrowed, calculating, resolute. The final confrontation was coming, not in courtrooms, not in strategy sessions, but in the dangerous, unpredictable territory of the human heart, where trust could be weaponized and betrayal lurked closer than she had ever imagined. Sarai's eyes traced the skyline as the message glowed on her phone. The words weren't a threat, they were a promise, an unspoken declaration that the real challenge was now intimate, immediate, and unavoidable. She slipped the phone into her pocket and breathed deeply, centering herself. Years of surgical precision, strategic thinking, and navigating betrayal had prepared her for this. But instinct whispered that this time, the battlefield would be personal. By morning, she had mobilized her network quietly. Dante was aware in broad strokes. He understood the stakes without needing specifics. Micah's safety was her priority, and the unknown observer was already a variable that could not be ignored. Every contact she trusted, every legal, security, and medical resource was on standby. Nothing would be left to chance. Sarai returned to her office and methodically reviewed the files. Her heart was calm, her mind analytical. Whoever this ghost was, they had access, intimate, close, and informed. Her first suspicion naturally fell on Eleanor Sterling. Even though Eleanor had confessed her manipulations, the matriarch had never been entirely predictable. But Eleanor's motives had always been structured around legacy and control, not chaos. Her second suspicion was someone closer, someone who had had consistent access to her home, her life, or her work. The phrase, "closer than you realize," gnawed at her. It suggested intimacy, familiarity, a sense of trust betrayed. Sarai ran through everyone in her circle, colleagues, staff, neighbors, even temporary hospital personnel she had allowed within restricted areas. Every scenario had been catalogued before, but this was different. This threat was subtle, intelligent and patient. She decided to bait the trap. The first move was deliberate. She sent an innocuous message to Julian. Not a confrontation, not a plea, but a simple update regarding Hope's legal protection and arrangements. If the ghost monitored communications, the response, or lack thereof, would indicate their proximity and intent. 2 hours later, an encrypted email appeared in her secure account. No signature, just a single line. You think you can anticipate me? You're excellent, but even excellence has blind spots. Sarai didn't flinch. She had expected this. She knew that whoever it was would test her boundaries, her intellect, and her ability to predict human behavior. But she also knew one immutable truth. She had survived betrayal, abandonment, corporate ruin, and family cruelty. This would be no different. Her plan shifted from defensive to proactive. The ghost needed to be drawn out, but subtly. She arranged a meeting with Serafina under professional pretense, a neutral space, legal oversight, and surveillance, ensuring that if the ghost attempted interference, they would reveal themselves. Every potential ally or threat was mapped. Dante was briefed, positioned to intervene if the situation escalated. At the meeting, Serafina arrived calm, poised, and unreadable. She carried herself as if she had won, yet her eyes betrayed calculation. Sarai didn't offer emotion. She offered clarity. "The child is secure," she said, voice cold, deliberate. "Your leverage is null. Any attempt to undermine this arrangement will be met with immediate legal and protective response." Serafina's lips curved faintly. "I never intended harm. Not yet. But you underestimate influence. There are strings even Julian couldn't see, and I've kept them close." Sarai recognized the threat immediately. Financial instruments, legal loopholes, offshore entities, all tools Serafina could exploit to regain leverage. But the key word was influence, and that suggested human involvement, an accomplice who operated within her orbit. The first twist came when Dante, reviewing the secure feeds and communications logs, identified an anomaly. One of Sarai's trusted administrative assistants had been accessing files remotely at odd hours, coinciding with the messages and email timing. Sarai's heart didn't panic. It sharpened. She now had the suspect identified. Someone intimate, someone trusted, but who had chosen ambition or greed over loyalty. The confrontation was unavoidable. She requested the assistant meet under the guise of reviewing a new pediatric project. When the individual arrived, Sarai was calm, measured, but resolute. Every step, every word, every glance was controlled, surgical in its precision. "You've been accessing files," Sarai said, her tone quiet but lethal. "You've been feeding information, creating confusion, attempting to manipulate the situation with hope. Why?" The assistant's face went pale. "I I was only following instructions. They promised compensation, protection. I didn't know it would escalate. Who?" Sarai interrupted. Her voice left no room for deception. "Who is orchestrating this?" The assistant faltered, realizing escape was impossible. It's it's someone higher up, someone who wanted control over Sterling's remaining influence and the assets you control. They thought if they destabilized your family, they could pressure you into concessions. I I wasn't the mastermind." Sarai's mind connected the dots. Eleanor, possibly. Serafina, likely. But the ghost's identity, the orchestrator with direct access, was someone embedded even closer than Julian or Eleanor had ever been. Her calm, controlled exterior remained, but her intellect was already tracing the threads, preparing the final counterstrike. The second twist revealed itself. The assistant had left digital fingerprints, correspondence, and a trail of transactions leading to a new shell corporation, eerily similar in structure to the one Sarai had used to dismantle Julian's corporate empire years prior. The irony wasn't lost on her. The cycle of manipulation and betrayal had come full circle. She immediately enacted containment protocols, access revoked, systems audited, communication logs reviewed, and physical oversight reinforced. The ghost's ability to influence or harm was neutralized, but the mind behind it remained unexposed. Sarai knew they were testing her patience, intellect, and control. By nightfall, she arranged a secure call with Julian. He was no longer a threat, no longer a pawn. He was a witness, a humbled observer of her capabilities. She briefed him, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in precise cold truth. The ghost was someone in proximity, observing, waiting. They had been careful, patient, and cunning. "You must understand," Sarai said, "Hope's safety and Micah's stability are non-negotiable. Any misstep, any hint of manipulation, and the legal consequences will be immediate and severe. This is your final chance to participate responsibly, or not at all." Julian nodded, stripped of pride, ego, and entitlement. His respect for her, begrudgingly earned, was genuine. He had learned the cost of recklessness and betrayal, and now he witnessed mastery born from resilience, intellect, and unshakable moral authority. Sarai's eyes then turned inward toward her home, her son, and Dante. She realized that the real ghost wasn't just the assistant, the shell corporation, or the hidden threat. It was the lingering potential for betrayal, the human factor that could never be entirely predicted. But she had built the fortresses, controlled the environment, and prepared for every contingency. The final twist emerged when Dante, reviewing secure communication channels, detected a series of encrypted messages originating not from Serafina or Eleanor, but from a device within her own home network, a device tied to Micah's nursery, seemingly innocuous, monitored by an unknown signal. The ghost had been physically closer than anyone had imagined. Sarai's pulse steadied, her focus sharpened. She realized the final confrontation would not be corporate, legal, or distant. It would be immediate, intimate, and unavoidable. The battlefield was no longer theory. It was real. She gathered her essentials, reviewed contingency protocols one last time, and walked toward her home with Dante by her side. Every step deliberate, every thought precise, every possibility accounted for. The storm of betrayal, manipulation, and human unpredictability had not ended. It was entering its final phase. As she approached the door, a shadow detached itself from the dim hallway inside. A figure familiar in stature, intimate in manner, yet concealed in intent, emerged, and a soft, deliberate voice whispered, "You thought it was over, Sarai, but I've been waiting, watching, learning. Now it's my move." Her eyes narrowed, heart steady, intellect alight. The final game had begun. Sarai stepped forward, every muscle taut, every thought sharpened, knowing that the ultimate confrontation, one that would determine the safety of both Micah and Hope, the culmination of years of betrayal, resilience, and strategy, was now face to face. The ghost within her circle, the one she had never anticipated, was finally revealed. But who it was remained hidden in the shadows, waiting for her first move.